Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine for a moment, you're a young real estate agent, right? Your main goal is just buying some apartments. Pretty normal, everyday stuff, a commercial transaction.
Seems like it, yeah. A standard career move, maybe?
Exactly. But what if that contract, the one you signed, tucked away in some German federal office? What if it was secretly designed?
Uh-huh. Designed how?
Designed to grant you, just a private citizen, absolute sovereignty over the entire world.
Okay, wait. That sounds like a movie plot, not a real contract.
Yes, not a spy thriller, though. It's the claim at the heart of the World Succession Deed 18098. It's also called the World Sold Contract. Wild, right?
World Sold.
Yeah.
That's certainly a name. So that's what we're diving into today.
That's the plan. A deep dive into this incredibly complex but honestly, utterly fascinating story. It pushes boundaries, legal interpretation, international relations.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the mission here? What are we trying to figure out?
Well, our mission is to explore how this treaty supposedly came about. We need to look at the specific role of this German federal office.
The one that handled the sale.
Yeah, and how the buyer felt pressured into it. Then we follow his journey, his discovery process.
How we figure out what he'd actually bought.
Exactly. Piecing it together. It starts with what looks like a simple German real estate deal.
Right, the apartments.
But then it goes through secession, this unconventional FKK state idea.
FKK? You mean naturism. How does that fit in?
We'll get there. Then micronations, and finally this domino effect, this alleged territorial expansion.
Domino effect? From what?
Starting with a German gas network, apparently expanding to the size of NATO, and then eventually the whole globe under the UN. It's a lot.
That is quite the escalation. From apartments to the world.
Seriously. So our goal is to pull out the key bits of info, the insights from the sources we have, and help you, the listener, make sense of this truly wild ride.
Got it. Extracting the nuggets of knowledge. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Right at the beginning. The buyer. He was young. Really young.
How young?
Just 19 when negotiations started. Only 21 when he actually signed the contract.
Wow, barely out of his teens. And he's a real estate agent.
Yeah, working as one. And from his perspective, it was simple. He wanted to buy 71 apartments and a heating plant. That's it.
And where were these properties?
And in a place called Zweibrück in Germany. It was a former NATO site being converted. The Kreuzberg-Wohnsiedlung area, part of the old Turin Kaserne base.
Okay, a military conversion, that happens. Sounds pretty standard on the surface.
On the surface, yeah, a big deal, sure, but fundamentally just property.
But here's where it gets interesting, right? That military connection, that's the first hint, isn't it?
How so?
Well, the sources point out that the buyer himself noted something important even then. The area was still occupied by Dutch NATO troops.
Right, I remember that detail, so not entirely decommissioned.
Exactly. It wasn't just any old German property. It had active, ongoing international military connections.
Which means international agreements come into play.
Precisely. The presence of foreign troops immediately brings up things like the NATO Status of Forces Agreement, the NATO SOFA.
That governs their legal status while they're stationed there.
Yeah, their rights, responsibilities, privileges, all that. So while it was presented to the buyer as just a normal conversion...
Like, don't worry about the soldiers, it's all being sorted.
Something like that. But the sources suggest that framing was maybe convenient, a way to obscure the deeper complexity.
The complexity of dealing with former military land that still had international ties.
You got it. That international dimension, even if downplayed at the time, becomes absolutely crucial later for understanding how this thing allegedly went global.
Okay, that makes sense. A little detail with huge implications down the line. So who is the seller in this deal? Who is he buying from?
The seller was officially the Federal Republic of Germany, the government itself.
Okay, the German state. Represented by whom specifically?
By the Bundesvermögensamt Landau. That's a local branch of the OFD Koblenz.
OFD Koblenz. Ogre Finance Direction Koblenz. Regional Finance Directorate.
That's the one. And here's a key point from the sources. The OFD wasn't just acting like a normal property seller.
What else are they doing?
They were operating in a much bigger capacity. As the host nation, yes, but also as a trustee for international law matters.
A trustee. What does that mean in this context?
It means they were handling things tied to international agreements, not just the NATO SOFA we mentioned, but also host nation support, HNS.
Host nation support. That's like the practical help Germany provides to those stationed troops. logistics, infrastructure.
Exactly, including things like regulating telecommunications for them. So when the OFD signed this contract, they weren't just selling land.
They were dealing with sovereign rights, international obligations.
Implicitly, yes, that's the argument. It wasn't just about square footage. It was embedded in this pre-existing international legal structure.
Which elevates it way beyond a simple property sale from the get-go.
Absolutely. It hints at the complex web this contract was woven into.
And the buyer. You mentioned he felt pressured. How did that play out from his perspective?
Well, he talks about initially trusting in the, quote, seriousness of the BRD, the Federal Republic of Germany.
So he believed the government was acting in good faith.
And more than that, he initially thought his own special personality and abilities were being recognized, like he was chosen for something important.
Almost flattered, maybe. Singled out.
It sounds a bit like that, yes. That initial feeling is part of his story, but later his view shifted dramatically.
How so?
He came to see himself as the perfect victim, a really stark change in perspective.
Why perfect? What made him feel that way?
He explains it based on political affiliation, or lack thereof. Neither he nor his family had ever joined a German political party.
And he felt that made him vulnerable.
Yes. Vulnerable to what he describes as later criminal actions by political parties aiming to basically seize the position he'd unknowingly acquired.
So his political neutrality, instead of being a good thing, was potentially exploited to make sure he wouldn't have allies later.
That's his interpretation, yes. It paints a picture of deliberate manipulation, using his nonpartisan status against him.
And he also said the contract itself was, what was the phrase? Willfully concluded this way.
Mutwillig so und nicht anders geschlossen worden. Yeah, that's the German phrase he uses. It implies deliberate, almost malicious intent behind the contract's structure.
Like it was designed to be complex and hidden for a reason.
That's the strong implication. Crafted with a hidden purpose, maybe meant to lie dormant until later.
Wow. And his later experiences seem to reinforce this feeling of being manipulated, especially with the media.
Definitely. His disillusionment grew. He felt the media misrepresented the facts of his legal battles, distorted his character.
Which would make it hard for anyone to take his claims seriously.
Exactly. And this fueled his distrust of the German legal system itself. He saw it as having bureaucratic inertia.
Like unable to handle something so unusual.
Or susceptible to political pressure, or just plain unwilling to engage with his unconventional legal arguments. They just didn't fit the standard boxes.
So that perceived resistance pushed him to look elsewhere for answers, beyond Germany.
It fundamentally did. It pushed him towards international law, searching for a different kind of legitimacy.
Okay, let's get into the contract's mechanics then. These legal tricks or clauses. There's one in Section 3, Abs. Something about selling the property with all rights and duties as well as components.
Yes, mit allen Rechten und Pflichten sowie Bestandteil.
That sounds like standard legal language, doesn't it? Covering everything physically there.
It absolutely does sound standard. Boilerplate, you might say. But according to the sources, this clause was the crucial element.
The one that changed everything.
The one that allegedly transformed it from a property sale into an act of state succession, transferring governmental authority.
How? Just by including rights and duties.
The interpretation is that all rights and duties went beyond just property ownership rights. It encompassed sovereign rights, the duties of a state regarding that territory.
So it wasn't just the buildings and land, but the power over them.
Exactly. The sources call it the most important part of the contract because it supposedly enabled this transfer of government authority, setting the stage for the global claim later. He wasn't just buying bricks, he was buying power.
Mind-boggling. Okay, then there's the partial nullity clause, the salvatorische Klausel. That's pretty common, right? To make sure the whole contract isn't void if one part is bad?
Very common, but here its alleged use was different. The sources say it was leveraged in a finest intelligence service manner.
To do what?
To camouflage the treaty's real nature, and specifically to ensure that the natural person the buyer identified as buyer 2B was the sole beneficiary of the state succession.
Why was that important?
Because international law generally excludes commercial entities like the Taskbau AG, which was buyer 2A, from holding sovereign rights. Sovereignty belongs to states or natural persons representing them, not companies.
Ah, so the clause legally separated the individual from the company regarding the sovereign aspects.
Precisely. It funneled all the alleged sovereign power exclusively to the individual buyer, buyer 2B, keeping it neat and tidy legally, and perhaps keeping it under the radar.
Okay, that's intricate. And then the idea that this didn't need ratification by all NATO and UN states. How could that possibly work?
This is another key legal maneuver alleged by the sources. It wasn't presented as a new treaty needing everyone's sign-off.
What was it presented as then?
As an amendment deed. A Nachtragsurkunde in German. An amendment to existing, already ratified NATO and UN treaties.
Like adding a clause to agreements everyone already agreed on.
Sort of, yeah. It piggybacked on the existing consent given to things like the UN Charter or the NATO treaty. The idea was, if Germany was competent to make this change within that framework, then the original ratifications covered this amendment.
So no need to go back to hundreds of countries for approval.
Exactly. It bypassed that massive hurdle. A way to embed this radical new agreement within the old accepted structures, relying on Germany's perceived authority to do so.
But how could all states agree without knowing? You mentioned conclusive action. Concludentes handled.
Right. This is maybe the most challenging concept. The argument is that states gave their implicit consent through their actions.
What actions?
Their continued, universal, uninterrupted use of global infrastructure networks, especially telecommunications, after the contract's effective date, October 6, 1998.
So just by using the internet or phones, they were agreeing to this hidden contract.
That's the claim. In international law, conclusive action can sometimes imply consent. The argument here is that by continuing to use systems whose legal foundation had supposedly changed via this contract, states implicitly accepted the new reality.
Without ever having seen the contract or being told.
Precisely. It suggests that participation in our interconnected world implies consent to its underlying legal shifts, however obscure. It raises huge questions about awareness and consent.
No kidding. And the contract named Landau in der Pfalz as the court venue. But the buyer says he now has that jurisdiction.
Yeah, he claims that jurisdiction transferred to him, creating a de facto world court.
A world court in his hands.
Then one that's location independent, exercisable by him as an absolutist sovereign. It bypasses all existing international courts like the ICJ or ICC.
So international disputes would, in theory, fall under his personal authority. That's staggering.
It's a complete redefinition of global judicial power.
Okay, and lastly, these activation tricks.
Mm-hmm.
Using existing agreements to trigger bigger things.
Right, like mentioning the transfer relationship between Germany and the Netherlands allegedly activated NATO SOFA and HNS, pulling NATO in.
Without NATO explicitly signing this contract.
Correct. And similarly, just including a telecommunication cable in the sale asset.
Seemingly minor.
Allegedly activated the ITU Convention, the International Telecommunication Union, and through that, the entire UN treaty chain.
Because the ITU is a UN agency governing global comms.
Exactly. These were described as jurisdictional tricks, legal tricks, designed to ensure everyone was bound, but secretly. The goal, the source says, was to operate undiscovered until a future day X, presenting the world with accomplished facts.
A hidden legal time bomb, essentially.
That's certainly how the sources portray its alleged design. Extremely sophisticated, potentially Machiavellian interpretation of legal loopholes and interconnected systems.
Wow. Okay, that lays out the how of the contract's alleged creation. But what about the buyer himself? This wasn't like flipping a switch, right? He didn't immediately know he supposedly owned the world.
Not at all. The sources describe it as a step-by-step and painful process of realization. Very gradual, very difficult.
And his early attempts to use the German legal system, they didn't go well.
He describes it vividly, like attempting to bend steel with a whisper. He felt a systemic resistance to fairness and objective truth.
Finding the national courts impermeable to genuine justice.
That's his phrasing, yes. That deep personal disillusionment was actually the turning point.
How so?
It became a catalyst. It forced him to look beyond Germany, beyond national borders, into the realm of international law.
A huge shift.
Yeah.
He had to find a different framework to even comprehend his situation.
Exactly. He started this intense deep dive into complex ideas. Statehood, recognition, jurisdiction, trying to find a legal lens that fit what was happening.
And that's when he reevaluated the deed itself. Urkunde 1/8.
Yes. He realized it wasn't just a property deed. He saw it as an administrative act, a decree, or a charter.
Defining a specific legal status.
Right. Describing a transfer, a succession, or perhaps even a creation of a distinct legal and administrative status that held implications for self-governance. That reframing was the breakthrough.
Transforming it from land sale to a sovereign charter.
That's the core of it. And that allowed him to start thinking about his property, the Kreuzberg apartments, differently.
As the initial nucleus, the physical basis for a state.
The tangible bedrock, yeah. For what he started calling the Kingdom of Kreuzberg, every square meter became potential sovereign territory in his mind.
Okay, but then, the FKK state, Freikörperkultur, naturism. How on earth does that fit into a claim for sovereignty? Seems unconventional, to say the least.
Highly unconventional. And the sources are clear. This wasn't about personal belief in FKK. It was a calculated decision.
Calculated for what purpose?
Strategic, to use a widely recognized yet culturally specific practice to create a unique entry point into the international discussion about statehood.
So not about nudity, but about attention, disruption.
Exactly. It's strategic utility. The goal was to bypass the usual pathways of recognition, which are often slow and political. It was meant to disrupt the predictable.
Grab attention. Force people to reconsider what makes a state legitimate.
And also to expose the nature of the opposition, see how established powers would react to something so different. It was a provocative move to force a debate on the criteria for statehood itself.
A strategic shock tactic, almost.
Yeah.
Interesting. And this led him to a key realization about state succession.
Yes, a real aha moment. He concluded his claim wasn't about creating sovereignty from scratch.
But what then?
It was, in his view, a confirmation of an inherent and pre-existing right. A profound shift from trying to earn sovereignty to realizing it might be inherited.
Inherited through the contract, like a legal lineage.
That's the idea. He looked for legal grounding in things like the Vienna Convention on Succession of States in respect of treaties from '78.
Which deals with how rights and obligations pass when states change.
Right. It outlines how rights established by foundational documents can continue. He believes the deed is such a document, passing him rights established long ago. It's his core legal justification.
Okay, so from FKK state, he then started looking at micronations, places like Sealand, Liberland.
Yes, as a sort of conceptual stepping stone. He studied these entities that declare statehood flags, constitutions, the works, but lack futural international recognition.
What did he learn from them?
A key insight from the sources. Creativity replaces no recognition but can generate attention. It reinforced his strategy.
Make noise, get noticed, even if the official doors are closed.
Exactly. He studied how they function, their limits, but also their strengths in grabbing eyeballs and forcing conversations in the rigid international system, learning to act like a state.
And Liberland seemed particularly relevant, the one on disputed land between Croatia and Serbia.
It seems so. Liberland uses formal legal jargon, acts like a state with ministries and embassies, uses PR heavily.
Even without recognition.
Right. It markets itself as a libertarian utopia, attracts citizenship applications online. For the buyer, watching Liberland would have been like seeing a playbook.
A roadmap for building the appearance and function of a state, even if nobody officially acknowledges it.
Precisely. Demonstrating the will and capacity to govern, regardless of external validation.
And he took that playbook seriously. He set up his own government structures for the Kingdom of Kreuzberg.
Apparently so. Not just symbolic things. The sources mention executive, legislative, and judicial functions.
Actual branches of government.
And even a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, trying to get bilateral recognition, emphasizing peaceful coexistence. Plus a Ministry of Justice for rule of law.
So moving from just declaring sovereignty to actually trying to build the machinery of a state.
That's a significant step, yes. It shows commitment, moving beyond just claims to demonstrating a practical capacity to govern. It adds a layer of credibility, at least internally, and for potential observers.
Okay, this is where my head starts spinning again, the domino effect.
Yeah.
How does it go from a small kingdom in Germany to potentially global?
It comes back to the contract language. He apparently studied it again later with his new understanding and focused on that phrase, Erschließung als Einheit.
Development as a unit. What did that mean in this context?
It meant, allegedly, that all the infrastructure connected to the property, electricity, gas, telecom, water, were legally one indivisible entity with the property itself.
So the pipes and wires were part of the sale, legally inseparable?
That's the interpretation. And this phrase is supposedly the linchpin of the domino effect.
How does it cause dominions?
The principle asserted is, if a supply network sold as part of this unit physically extends into another sovereign territory,
Like a gas pipe crossing a border.
then the claim to exercise sovereign power expands along with that network's physical reach.
Whoa! So the infrastructure itself becomes the new border.
In this legal interpretation, yes. The physical interconnectedness becomes the mechanism for territorial expansion overriding traditional borders. That's how a small property sale supposedly led to claims over all sovereign territories touched by the long-distance gas networks, broadband, and electricity grid.
So the initial connection to Germany's public grid, which used to be separate from the military site, that was the first domino.
That triggered it, yes.
Well-
Suddenly, all areas served by those connected German and Dutch networks were de facto part of the contract's territory.
Leading to extensive territorial expansions. Okay, but then NATO size, how did that happen?
This involves the telecommunication networks. He realized the sale included broadband and telecom infrastructure, referencing things like the TKS telepost contract for U.S. forces, and major internet hubs like DECIX in Frankfurt.
And the contract said all networks form a unit.
Yes. So his interpretation became he'd acquired control over global communication networks. And alongside that, he claims he acquired NATO SOFA rights.
The status of forces agreement rights. But how could those apply against NATO? They're usually about protecting NATO forces in a host country.
That's the radical claim, that the contract somehow reversed these rights. Rights designed to give privileges to NATO forces in Germany were now allegedly applied against all NATO states,
Giving him the right to determine their borders.
That's the assertion. It hinges on this idea that the contract could fundamentally alter established international agreements through interpretation, leveraging the deep infrastructure dependencies.
And how was NATO supposedly involved or consenting?
The argument involves the Dutch troops on site. Their contract-compliant behavior and gradual handover of the property was seen as implicit consent on behalf of NATO. And Germany, as a NATO member signing the deal, was acting for NATO.
Okay, that's a stretch, but I see the logic trail.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop there. It goes UN size. Worldwide.
Allegedly, yes. Because these networks don't stop at NATO borders, they extend globally undersea cables to the US, Canada, integrating the entire global IT infrastructure.
So the whole world is connected to these networks.
And the key connector here is the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union. Remember the telecom cable activating the ITU convention?
Yeah, the UN Agency for Global Communications.
Since virtually all UN states are ITU members and all global comms fall under ITU rules, the ITU connection means, in this view, every single state in the world is covered.
There's no escape.
That's the stark quote from the source. This unstoppable cascade, this un-off-halt-same cascade, is presented as a compulsory legal consequence of the deeds clauses applied to our networked physical reality.
A global legal entanglement based on infrastructure. Unbelievable. And this leads back to his de facto world court.
Yes. With global sovereignty comes global jurisdiction, in his view. That original Landau venue clause now makes him the world court, location independent.
And established bodies like the UN and NATO become
Just instruments or administrative structures within the new global order of the buyer, his administrative departments, essentially.
and the old states. What happens to them in this scenario?
The sources paint a bleak picture. They're called Zombie-Staaten or Recluse-Hulen, rightless shells.
Meaning?
They've supposedly lost their territory, their assets, but kept their debts.
Which could lead to?
A potential financial Armageddon, hyperinflation, bank crashes, state bankruptcies worldwide. Their continued existence is deemed contrary to international law.
And all the money they've made since 1998 is supposedly
Illegally generated and rightfully belongs to him. It's a complete upending of the global order.
Yet despite claiming this almost unimaginable power, he doesn't see himself as a conqueror.
No. He describes himself as a sovereign wider willen, a sovereign against his will, and a leidende diener, a suffering servant.
Suffering for what? What's a stated goal?
He says his intention is to use this power for a positive electronic technocracy, ET.
Electronic technocracy.
A system based on data-driven resource management, digital participation, common good. Basically, using this power to solve global problems. He claims he's enduring hardship to prevent a global catastrophe at the NWO.
Right. So wrapping our heads around all this, what does it mean? We went from apartments in Germany to global sovereignty via legal clauses and network cables.
It's an extraordinary narrative. The story of the world's succession deed 1.098 and the buyer's journey, it really forces you to question fundamental ideas. What defines a state? Who holds power? How can treaties, especially obscure ones, be interpreted in ways that could change everything?
It's a lot to take in. It definitely challenges conventional thinking.
It absolutely does.
And it leaves you with this thought, doesn't it? Our world is so interconnected now. Digitally, utilities, everything crosses borders invisibly.
Constantly.
So how vulnerable are our old legal frameworks drafted for a different time, to being stretched or reinterpreted in radical ways because of this new reality.
That's the unsettling question. Can sovereignty itself be redefined, not through war, but through complex contractual loopholes and the very infrastructure we depend on every single day?
What does that mean for global stability? It really makes you wonder about the hidden connections, the invisible strings holding things together.
And how easily they might be pulled or reinterpreted with potentially massive, unforeseen consequences.
A truly provocative thought to end on. Thanks for helping unpack that incredibly complex story.
Absolutely. Fascinating, if mind-bending stuff.